this is a really fantastic way to conclude what's been a tremendous day. Quite a broad, sweeping view of all aspects of the energy sector, what's happening with the U.S. Shale revolution, what's happening with activism on climate change, what's happening in emerging markets, what's happening with clean energy technologies. And I can't think of a better way to try to bring all those things together than with our closing keynote conversation with Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who served from 2013 to 2019 as a U.S. Senator from North Dakota, a Democrat in a red state, and the first female senator from North Dakota. An important energy state, as you all know, again, across the board, a major wind energy producer, obviously the home of the Bakken Shale Formation, and the second largest oil-producing state in the country. Prior to serving in the Senate, Senator Heitkamp served as the Attorney General of North Dakota and as the state's tax commissioner, and she started her career working as an attorney for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She's now a visiting fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard. Senator Heitkamp, welcome to Columbia University.
Yes, and I have to give a shout out to one of my fellows,
yeah,
Congressman Cabello, who we spend quality time together in Harvard. Thank you so much for having me. One of the things that you didn't hear on this resume that I think helps kind of inform my opinion is I spent the better part of a decade on a board of directors of a utility company. It was actually a large generation transmission power cooperative that actually bought a synfuels plant in Beulah, North Dakota. If you followed natural gas prices during the tumultuous and post-regulation world, you know that they went up, they went down. At one point, we didn't think there was enough natural gas in the world. We wouldn't even let you generate electricity with natural gas. And so part of what was the old ERDA system and President Carter's response to the oil embargo was to basically invest in coal to liquids or coal to gas technologies. We built a big plant in North Dakota using lignite coal, and then pretty much the whole system collapsed. So it was hard to make it profitable, except we started doing something nobody else was doing. We started compressing CO2 on the back end of that process, that syngas process. We were fortunate that we had a conventional oil field just to the north that would buy that CO2. And we started doing what was at the time the largest carbon capture sequestration project, probably in the world, but certainly in the United States and Canada, because the oil field was Cenovus's field up in Canada. I guess they're not even Cenovus anymore. They keep changing their name on me. But so I spent a lot of time kind of appreciating and understanding some of the challenges of that technology. But I also, during my time as Attorney General, was on the Industrial Commission, which regulated oil and gas and promoted the lignite energy industry. And I started my career in tax, in severance taxes involving coal and oil. So I had to quickly learn this industry, not just from a public policy standpoint, but this industry from a technological standpoint. So it made me kind of uniquely qualified, I think, to have a broader conversation about energy when I got to Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you heard the end of the last panel. I'll start with that question that we talked about, which is the possibility of what someone called a grand bargain, but really bipartisan. You spent a lot of time finding ways to build consensus across the political aisle. You do see movement. You called out one of our distinguished visiting fellows at Columbia, Congressman Cabello, who introduced carbon pricing legislation and some signs of increased attention being paid to this issue on the Republican side of the aisle. But still, it seems to be getting harder and harder. And that's true on the left, too, where I think parts we'll see in the Democratic primary how that plays out. But maybe some increasing challenges to try to find common ground on issues of U.S. energy production and how to combine that with stronger action on climate change. Is there hope for getting stuff done in Washington and building bipartisan consensus?
Well, if I can kind of raise two examples, and maybe it's just, licking your wounds if you lose an election, but we had some incredible success in Washington. I came there with, as I said, a broad kind of energy policy, but also an appreciation for the challenges of CO2 as a pollutant, recognizing that U.S. versus Massachusetts wasn't going to go away anytime soon. And when the coal industry would come in, which, I was very supportive, still am, of their industry and their innovation, I would say, if you can always have my vote, but if you want my leadership, you can't be hell no. I don't care if fighting carbon is against your religion. You will be an endangered species unless you get in the dialogue. And I would use the often quoted phrase, Texas phrase, if you're not at the table, you're for lunch. And so what we started doing is trying to figure out how we could message what we wanted to do. And probably the first big success was opening up oil exports. That was something no one thought we could do. We actually got it done in a year. Right? Pretty incredible work. And we really formed a coalition and didn't leave anyone behind. The oil industry came in and was very honest about what this stranded resource would be if we couldn't find a market for it, how important it was to the allies. We engaged everybody. No one thought we could get it done, but at the end, the grand bargain was we were able to open up export markets for the oil industry, the domestic oil industry in the lower 48. But in exchange for that, we stabilized production tax credits. We didn't do what we called tax extenders, where at the end of the year we said, yeah, I guess we'll give them to you. We provided a predictable guide path for investment tax credits and production tax credits. And as a result of that work, that's probably one of the most significant things that happened for the development of the renewable energy industry, is to provide that stability. That's why you see this huge amping up of investment right now in renewables. Not only is it the mandates that states are imposing, but it also is a pretty good time to capture those credits because they're going to go away. And so we're really proud of that work. I'm really proud of that work. But take a look at 45Q, which I'm sure you guys have talked about. That's the tax credit for carbon capture, sequestration, and utilization. We've got some challenges in terms of getting a regulatory environment that will make that tax credit work. Vicky over Occidental Petroleum is proving that you can use this kind of CO2 flood in a shale play, which is really important in states like North Dakota. But if you look at that work, think about this. People always say, well, how did you get that done? I said, because I didn't call it a climate bill. Sheldon didn't even call it a climate bill. I mean, he knew why he was doing it.
Senator Whitehouse.
Yeah, Senator Whitehouse. He knew why he was doing it, right? Because he knew how critical development of this technology was to achieving climate goals. And so when you can get Mitch McConnell and Sheldon Whitehouse on a piece of legislation that everybody is as gung-ho on, then you know you found the sweet legislative spot, right? And so we were able to get that across the finish line. I jokingly say that one of my visits to the White House, the president told me about how he had gotten that done, and I was trying to think when I saw the president engage on the carbon capture credit. But everybody, the old thing of failure is an orphan and success has many fathers. But it is, I think, a way of thinking about how we can advance ideas in this really polarized world. The other thing that I would tell you that's going to drive this is I am convinced that carbon and climate are going to be huge voting issues. The congressman just missed that window of opportunity, right?
That's true in North Dakota.
Right.
As well?
So, I don't think it's true in North Dakota. I don't think it's going to be one thing that drives, that tips the scales, but it could be true in Florida. It could be true in Florida that it, in fact, and the president's going to pay really, really close attention to Florida because guess what? He can't win the presidency without Florida. I'll guarantee you that. If Florida goes for the Democratic nominee, the president will not be reelected. And as you see the red algae problem, as you see more and more high tide taking out passageways, as they actually see the consequence of climate, there's going to be more and more attention to this issue, and it's going to become a voting issue. And the fourth thing I would say is the insurance industry needs to engage. Is there any insurance industry executives here? They should be. What risk are they willing to take or not take? What's going to happen when you look at models of sea levels rising? I mean, there's a reason why you call Rhode Island, Rhode Island. You know, we used to say this in the flood in 2011, the Missouri River flooded. And it was interesting because every place that was named island, Fox Island, you know, they all flooded. And they flood for a reason. I mean, because at one point in their history, they were surrounded by water. And so my point would be the insurance industry needs to engage. We need to see engagement politically in a way that actually has consequences for people who deny this problem. And we need to look at ways to talk to each other like we did in the oil export challenge and the way we did with 45Q.
If you're trying to find in Washington, in this polarized environment, a path forward to be able to pass legislation that moves the ball forward in addressing the problem of climate change, is the Green New Deal helpful?
I don't know what the Green New Deal is. Does anyone know what it is here? No. I mean, I get people, students, and I know that the congressman gets them too, who come in who want to tell me that I'm evil because I come from a fossil state and a fossil fuel state, and I need to support the Green New Deal. And the last young woman who was pretty aggressive with me, I kind of said, name me 5 things that are in the Green New Deal. Well, it's about stopping carbon emissions. I said, I know that. What's your strategy? What's your tactic? And I think that it's great that there's a lot of energy around an aspirational goal, but you have to put pen to paper. And where the rubber meets the road for me on actual meaningful, broad-based strategies is what are you going to do with nuclear power? And if they can't answer that question, or if they answer that they can continue to provide reliable, redundant baseload power and not address that concern, I think it's not a serious proposal. So this is one thing I know from working in the utility industry. I understand an intermittent source on a power grid, and I understand a reliable, redundant, there every day source. As long as we don't have massive storage for renewables, we're going to need baseload power. We're seeing this transition from baseload power being coal generation to natural gas, in part, and I think largely driven by stability in natural gas prices. But I think that when you look in the natural gas industry knows, and there's probably some folks out there, that you need to not be the coal industry. You need to be on the forefront of tackling climate and CO2 emissions challenges. But I need you to be there if I'm serious about climate. I need you to be there because right now you are the source that seems to be the most politically acceptable for redundant and reliable energy on the power grid.
And when that point you made to that student, saying we want zero carbon energy is not enough, you need a policy, you need to implement something to do it, what would your answer to that be? You had concerns with the Clean Power Plan.
Yep.
So what would you propose?
I just thought that there was way too much political capital invested on trying to look at a 10-year plan on Clean Power Plan when you're looking at facilities that are 40 years old. Think about that. I mean, so you're spending all this political capital on a strategy that if you just give it 10 years, you already see it. There's no Clean Power Plan, and you're seeing every day, or at least every month, coal generation being taken out, either by a choice of utilities who are being pressured by consumer groups or shareholder groups to look for a different source, or they just are old facilities that they're not going to reinvest in. And so I think that there was a lot more innovative things that you could have done than what Gina did there. But I also understand she had a mandate under U.S. versus Massachusetts, and she had to meet it. I just thought that she wasn't listening. We sat down with some energy. In North Dakota, most of the generation that is coal generation is delivered by a generation transmission co-op. XL Energy is our major supplier, along with Otter Tail, that's investor-owned. And so a lot of what we would want to tackle in North Dakota is done in that co-op world. They're huge in wind. They have a lot of wind generation that's combined with their coal generation. They kind of said, look, this is what we can do, and we can meet those targets if you give us the flexibility. And they were just rigid about how they wanted to apply it. And I think that if we really want to solve this problem as quickly as what we can, we need to find the path of least resistance. And when you engage in a confrontational battle with everybody, you could find maybe one or two, but when you're engaged in a battle against everybody, that's not a winning strategy in Washington, D.C. That's a strategy for gridlock, and it's really, really great for one group of professionals called lawyers. They make a lot of money when things are litigated at every turn. And this is an administration that seems to have found its way to the courts in record numbers. And I think it's inefficient, and it doesn't, on a whole host of issues, including immigration, it's not particularly smart strategy.
And presumably one of the concerns, I would suspect, with the Clean Power Plan was it would have impacts on coal communities, and North Dakota
consumers.
Has a lot of people who work in that sector. Even with important progress, and we're investing a lot on that here at Columbia on issues of carbon capture, even with that technology, achieving anything close to our climate targets means less coal use over time. What can the federal government do, or state governments, that we haven't been able to do well enough so far to help give communities confidence that there is a path forward and a plan to help people transition?
Well, I have some pretty clear thoughts on this. So in the 1940s, when the coal miners went on strike and Truman told them to get back to work, they had working conditions, and the federal government said, don't worry, we got your back on your health care, we got your back on your pensions, and we're gonna be in this partnership, and we're gonna mandate and take care of you. Guess what they're not doing right now? We had to fight, almost shut down government over their health care, and they still haven't had their pensions guaranteed. So when you go to a coal mining community, especially in West Virginia, and you say, trust us, the federal government has a plan to help you transition, they kind of see what that plan looks like as it relates to their health care and their pensions. And so, it was interesting. I was with Mayor Mitch Landrieu yesterday, and he's been all over Appalachia. He's been all over, and he's gone to coal communities, and basically he said, don't think that they're blind to what their economic challenges are going forward. And I talked to Joe Manchin recently, and because I said, well, they've got to get out of the, what do you want to do? I want to mine coal. Well, no, really, what do you want to do? I want to mine coal. I want to mine coal. I want to mine coal. Well, that's not, maybe, in your future. And maybe we ought to have strategies for transitions of workforce. But this workforce transitional issue is so much bigger than just mining. When you look at AI, when you look at displacement from automation, if you look at the charts on automation and on displacement, what you're going to see is the lower your educational attainment, the more likely you can be replaced by a machine. And so many of these, the people, whether we're talking trade policy, globalization, whether we're talking automation, so many workers are out there have a lot of stress in their life because they don't know what that future looks like.
We heard from Governor Jay Inslee this morning, and he expressed a huge amount of concern with the idea of approving new hydrocarbon infrastructure like pipelines, was pretty negative on the role carbon capture might play. And this is a debate playing out within the Democratic Party. We're going to see it, I think, in the 2020 primary. How do you balance the role of the energy we're using today and U.S. energy production with the need to make more progress on climate change?
Well, I think you need to quit talking to the ideologues and start talking to the professionals. What do I mean by that? When everybody says, oh, well, the Trump administration is going to walk over everybody, and of course signing executive orders isn't the way to have a track record of collaboration and solving problems. I get that. But one thing I will tell you is if you look at Ernie Moniz's quadrennial energy analysis, when he looked at what the challenges are in energy, you know what his total focus was? On aging and failing energy infrastructure. It's all fine and good until you can't get gasoline from the refinery to New York City. It's all fine and good if you want to put all of this on trains. I guess part of the strategy in Washington is to stop any train from going on the rails that has a rail car that has crude oil on it. I think that the one entity in all of this that gets left behind in the discussion, because you mentioned coal miners, and we talk about the energy industry, and we talk about interest groups who are concerned and challenged by climate. What about consumers? Where are they in this discussion? And aren't they entitled to a seat at the table to talk about, hey, I don't want to pay an extra 50 cents a gallon on gasoline because you don't want a pipeline that's going to move gasoline. Here's a great example. The North, I'm sure you guys know about this. In Maine, Maine's locked in. They generate a lot of electricity with diesel, right? With old, dirty, sorry you guys, you oil and gas guys, but old technology. There's $3 an MCF natural gas, and even less on a variable rate, that's being produced not very far from Maine. 22 miles of pipe to cut across Massachusetts is what stops those consumers from getting lower cost electricity and cleaner electricity. So I think we've got to have a real discussion about if pipelines used to be, the discussion was about the damage you do, or a high voltage power line. What did that mean in terms of the health of people who lived around it? What did it mean if you're going to leak into water? Now it's oppose it if it's moving a fossil fuel. If that power line has any electrons that were generated by coal, then take it down. And I think it's I hate to be the evil person up here I care deeply about climate, but I care deeply about getting stuff done. And those kind of hardened positions on either side means we don't get things done. If we had sat down 15 years ago and actually had a conversation, been willing to compromise, we would have had 15 years of maybe modest and moderate proposals that would have achieved a whole lot more for climate in the last 15 years than what we got.
We see nuclear plants closing. The administration had to step in with support for the Vogtle plant. What do you see as the future for nuclear power?
I think it's an innovation, just like I think that's the future for coal, it's the future for natural gas. I think it's going to be in technology, which is why I'm so heavily invested in the 45Q kind of method. I was listening to your conversation earlier where you're talking about a carrot versus a stick. What can you do to incentivize and to assist in these transitions? I met young people from MIT who are working in this industry or looking at using spent fuel to generate electricity, talking about half-lives that are, 10 years. I don't know this stuff. Ernie, if you're out there, you need to educate me on this. But I think that there is a whole technological opportunity here on nuclear that we are not addressing because we're stuck. because we're stuck in a political ideology that it can't be part of the solution. And to me, we can learn a lot by just having conversations about how these technologies have changed in nuclear, I think.
And you talked about the growing level of concern among voters on climate change, and you said, well, maybe not as much in North Dakota. North Dakota does have a lot of clean energy, a lot of wind power in the state. Do the economic benefits of that, do you see as a path forward to build political support for that?
It's interesting, at a time when I like to think that I worked really hard to stabilize tax credits for production tax credits. North Dakota was introducing in the legislature a bill that would prohibit siting any wind tower. I'm like, really? And so there's this kind of growing backlash. Some people would say, and I think legitimately, fueled and financed by not major industry, oil and gas industries, but perhaps some of the independents who don't like this movement. But I want to just give you a number. The rural electric co-ops every year when I was in public life would do a public opinion poll in North Dakota. And they would ask, how concerned are you about climate? The number of people concerned in their poll among their membership was 65%. So don't think people aren't concerned. My point is they're concerned, but when they hear radical, we're going to shut down a pipeline, then that completely turns off their willingness to have a conversation about climate. And so I'm the capitulator, I guess, or the compromiser. I think that's how you get things done. I like to believe that what we did with oil exports actually had one of the most significant climate outcomes in terms of development of renewable fuels, right? But if you're going to be hardline and never do anything in a compromised way, you wouldn't have gotten that done.
In our closing minutes, I'm going to just ask you to put your political observer hat on. Who are you excited about in the 2020 Democratic field?
I'm excited about the competition, right? North Dakota didn't have a team in the NCAA tournament, but every week I picked a new one. So, and it wasn't Virginia, and it certainly wasn't Duke. I kind of became a big fan of Michigan State and had my heart broken in the Final Four. But I think that the competition is so important, and people forget that. When people say, who's going to win? I said, you got to see them play. You got to see them compete. You got to see what that ideas are. And I think that I'm very excited because I think when people like Michael Bennett get in, and when people like maybe Terry McAuliffe get in, when there's people from a broader spectrum, right now it seems like we're kind of huddled over here to the left. I think we're going to see a lot of people broadening the discussion. And what I would tell you is you've got almost complete consensus on what the problems are. Almost complete consensus. Maybe not in terms of prioritization of problems, but you have consensus. Now we're going to hear what the solutions are for each one of these problems. And it's going to be, I think, great to watch. And I, like most Democrats, have one major overriding concern and goal, and that is to win the presidency. And I don't say that as a partisan. I think that we have wasted 2 years. We will waste 6 more in getting stuff done in this country if we continue to elect people who don't know how to govern. And so it is time to make America work again, whether that is in infrastructure, whether that is, I have a saying I tell people, my goal, if I had a theme in this race, make government boring again, right? Take all of the angst out of what we're doing, make it boring again, make it work again. And make it so that when you talk about adjusted gross income, people's eyes glaze over, but you actually have a meaningful discussion, right? So I'm really looking forward to the marketplace of ideas, that is the Democratic primary, and hopefully at the end we will emerge with a candidate and a set of principles and policies that will capture the imagination and the goals, or the hearts and minds of the American public.
Given your political philosophy and a little bit about what we just heard with it, with respect to climate change, and from the standpoint of policy and electability, are you concerned about the Democrats kind of getting pulled to the left?
I'm concerned about them having a plan that's meaningless. So again, I go back to if you throw out an aspiration that's good, where's the strategy behind that? And I look behind that and I say, I don't see any real there. I mean, when somebody decides that carbon pricing is too, moderate of an idea to deal with climate, maybe you ought to rethink that plan, because it'd be really hard to pass carbon pricing right now in this Congress. But can you do things like build technologies? Can you do things like convene ideas, cafe standards? And the one thing, and I see Ulu over there, so he knows I'm going to get all wrapped up in this, but the one thing that we forget about when we talk about carbon capture sequestration, these credits, we think that one of the places where they're going to be deployed first in North Dakota is in ethanol. It just so happens that we can use those for enhanced oil recovery, so the credits have value, but and a place to go, the carbon does. But think about the value of using them in cement. UCLA has a huge research project on how carbon can be used in cement to actually improve the quality of the cement and reduce emissions. What, about 20% of all industrial emissions come from cement plants? Ethanol is up there as well. So if we can find a profit motive, and I get on my soapbox here, but you think about what Walmart did, right? Nobody's talking about conservation. We're all talking about sticking it to the fossil industry, but conservation is the low-hanging fruit. Energy conservation is the low-hanging fruit. And think about what Walmart did. And someone was talking about, that was out of concern for climate. I said, hell, it was out of concern for their profit, their bottom line. They're huge energy consumers, and when they reduce their energy consumption, they increase their profitability dramatically. Good for them. The profit motive can work, right? But you can't have a climate strategy without conservation. And I would argue, where's the geothermal discussion? Where's all of the things that we should be, looking at in the range of ideas, and how do we deploy them? And to me, the Democratic candidate that's going to come up with the most believable climate plan that people see has a future in terms of potentially getting enacted, I think will capture the imagination of the American voters and the Democratic voters.
Thank you, Senator Heitkamp.
Sorry about that.
No, this has been a tremendous panel. This has been a tremendous day. Again, sweeping the landscape, covering the gamut of energy issues, the urgency of climate change, the rapidly shifting role of the U.S. as a major producer and exporter, the geopolitical implications of that, the view of some of these issues from emerging market countries, just how to think about a world of enormous uncertainty and change in the energy sector, policy uncertainty, geopolitical risk, technological disruption. And these are the issues we work on every day at the Center on Global Energy Policy, and we appreciate all of you spending a full day with us. We hope you'll continue to follow our research, our events, our podcasts, our convenings, and I especially want to thank our distinguished keynote closing speaker, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.